All right, welcome to our second summer lecture from the Francis Schaeffer Study Center. We've been around for 20 years now, founded in 2004. Our mission is to promote a biblical worldview through the study of history, literature, and art. And we're sponsoring this lecture series this summer. We'll continue in the fall and also through the winter and spring. I want to keep doing this, and I have an abundance of topics that I'm eager to do some more lectures on. So after these first three, we'll do one again next month in September. And then in the fall, I'm going to do 3 lectures on Constantine and Augustine and Dante. So, and then we'll continue on after that. But welcome, thank you all for coming. This is being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. It's being recorded, so it'll be available on the YouTube channel of Abundant Life Church and also the YouTube channel of the Schaeffer Study Center. You can find it in all those places. And let me pray before we start, and we'll dive in. Father, thank you once again for the opportunity that we have to gather and to think about and talk about and look at and touch and handle some of these historic ways in which your word has been recorded and preserved and transmitted from generation to generation. Your Holy Spirit has preserved the word and makes it available to us and then comes and makes it alive for us as we read it. I thank you for all the good gifts you have given us. Pray that this time would be a blessing and a benefit, and that the things I say would be an encouragement and an exhortation to those who hear. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, for the benefit of those who were not here last month or who may be picking up this lecture, I'm Rob Scherer. My main claim to claim, I guess, is that I've been married for 47 years. We have 12 children and 19 grandchildren. And yeah, 2 more on the way. So that's fun. My undergraduate degree is from Davidson College, which you may know from one of our latest Olympian gold medal winners, Steph Curry. Yay, Steph. I have a master's degree from Stanford. I did my graduate work there. I did a year of study in Germany as a Fulbright scholar, working on Martin Luther and one of the princes who helped to usher in the Reformation in one of the territories of the German Principality. I've been a historian. I am a historian, a teacher, an author. I did teach college for a while. Some of you might know me because I was city manager here many, many moons ago. And my wife and I together have Greenleaf Press. So tonight's topic is the history of the Bible, or the history of the church in some ways, in 8 books. So we go from scrolls to books, copied by hand. We go finally to a printing press. All these over here come off of printing presses. We go from manuscripts copied by hand that are all uppercase, with no punctuation, no spaces between words. I'll invite you to come up and see if you can make any sense of any of this. We get upper and lower case in some of the later manuscripts. We don't even have any chapter divisions. And these chapter divisions first come in around 1200. And then finally, we get verse numbers, but after the inventing of the printing press, and actually not for 100 years. Gutenberg still does not have any verse numbers. He has chapter numbers, but no verse numbers. We'll talk about the details of that. So here are my 8 Bibles, and I'm cheating a little bit. Sinaiticus is the oldest complete Bible that we have, from about 350 AD, and Vaticanus, probably from about the same time. They're named for where they were discovered, and I'm counting those as one. The Lindisfarne Gospels, which I have a facsimile edition, this is the complete set of all 4 Gospels, written by hand over 5 years by a bishop in Northumberland on the island of Lindisfarne, Bishop Eadfrith. That's his handwriting. He did all 4 Gospels by hand, and we have that book. It's in the British Museum in London. This is a photographic facsimile of that. Book of Kells, very similar. It's about 100 years later, around 800. I'm going to count those two together as one. Then the Gutenberg Bible, a Biblia Sacra, which I have an actual page from Venice in 1479, printed by one of Gutenberg's assistants, someone he trained. The Luther Bible, I have a facsimile of that, complete. First complete Bible in any language other than Latin, printed. I have a Stephanus New Testament, and nobody knows what that is, and I'm kind of glad because that meant I got a page at auction cheap because nobody knew what they were bidding on. I did. It's the first Bible with verse numbers, and I've got a page over there printed in Geneva. A Geneva Bible, which is the English Bible that preceded the King James. Printed first in Geneva because the Protestants had to flee England from the persecution of Bloody Mary. And then after 1575, it starts being printed in London. It goes through 150 printings before it's replaced by the King James Bible. And then I've got a King James Bible. It's actually a New King James, but modern. The luxury that we have when you compare to all of this. So let me go through these. And like I say, I'm going to try and leave some time for Q&A and a chance for you to come up and look at these more closely. Honorable mentions. Erasmus published the Greek text of the New Testament in 1516, which is a hugely important Bible, but nobody pays much attention to it anymore, much to Erasmus's embarrassment. He was promoting the Greek text because he had done a new translation in a more polished, eloquent style of Latin that he was very proud of. And everybody ignored it and went, what, you've got the Greek text? And it sold out, had to be reprinted, and it sold out again. Luther had a copy. And Luther used Erasmus's Greek text to do his translation into German. Tyndale's New Testament is also an honorable mention, 1526. All three of these editions are crowded together because Tyndale did the first version of the New Testament in English that was printed. There had been some translations of some parts of the Bible by Wycliffe, but Wycliffe is a contemporary of Chaucer. So the dialect of English that Wycliffe translates the Bible into is Middle English, Wander opera with his shura sota. We would have a hard time understanding it now. So those are in the back of my head. Erasmus's text made the Greek text widely available. Luther's New Testament, first translation to German, and actually the first translation to any of the vernacular languages anywhere in Europe. And then Tyndale's is the first translation to English. So let's go back and talk about Sinaiticus. I've got two sheets, printed pages from Sinaiticus. This is from the Gospel of John. I guess I should do these this way. So we have Old Testament, New Testament. Here's the Gospel of John, and for the historical books, for all the Gospels, they're done 4 columns. This is, again, written out by hand by a scribe. This is the Song of Solomon. And for the Psalms and the poetry in the Old Testament, they did 2 columns. It's the oldest complete Bible that we have. It is in various places now. It's what's called an uncial Greek text, meaning it's all caps. No spaces, no chapter divisions, no verse divisions. It's just got the title of the book, and then it goes right in. It's possible that both of those manuscripts, because they both date from the middle of the 4th century, it's possible that both of them are 2 of the 50 commissioned by the Emperor Constantine. When Constantine was a Christian, and he did really convert to the church, and he really was friends with many of the bishops, we have a letter from the emperor to the bishop of Caesarea Maritima, Eusebius, requesting that he recruit and employ scribes to make 50 copies of the Bible for the churches in Constantinople, because Constantinople was a new city and it was growing like topsy. It was the new capital in the east. And he said, we need a Bible for each church. And so we know he's commissioned 50. And that's an incredible, luxurious, expensive item to produce. I'll talk about why in just a little bit. So we know the scribes in Caesarea Maritima made 50 copies. We have records of them being sent to Constantinople. We're not sure that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are two of them. And they're different from each other. They're different from each other in the handwriting, in the size of the pages, and there are even some textual variations between them. But if you're commissioning 50 scribes, they might have different handwriting. In fact, it would be surprising if they didn't. And they might have had been working from different source manuscripts. And so they could both be Bibles commissioned by Constantine. It's just almost impossible to determine at this late date whether that's true or not. So it wound up being given to the Russian Tsar because he had financed Tischendorf's expedition to Sinai to recover this. So it wound up in St. Petersburg in the collection of the Russian Tsar. And in the 1930s, when there was a famine and an economic collapse going on in Russia, Stalin ordered that all of the treasures of the Tsar be sold to raise money. They were out of cash. And so there was a public subscription in England, and the people of England donated the money to the British Museum. I think they paid $100,000 for it. And it went from St. Petersburg to London. It really is one of the foundation pieces for the British Museum, what is now the British National Library. There were a couple of pages in Germany. There's a couple of pages somewhere else. The monks in the Sinai actually found a few more pages. And so just within the last 10 years, they have reached an agreement, because the monks always disputed whether Tischendorf had the right to give it to the Tsar. But the monks in St. Catherine's and the museum in St. Petersburg, which still had a couple of pages, and the museum in Germany, which had a couple of pages, and the British Museum finally reached an agreement, and they have digitized and photographed every page, and it's available online with some very nice apparatus where you can zoom in and check individual readings on individual pages. So it's all available online now on the internet. Just amazing. Here's a picture of what the full manuscript looks like. It's about 500 pieces of vellum. These are on animal skins. So it's about 1,000 pages because they write on both sides. And it's bound together. It's roughly 10 by 10. Oh, sorry, this is Vaticanus. Sinaiticus is 15 by 13. So you can actually see the size. These are actually life size. So Vaticanus is slightly smaller than Sinaiticus. Vaticanus, same thing. Unsealed Greek text, no spaces, no chapter verse. It was in Constantinople until about 1450. And in 1450, Constantinople was like the Alamo. It was the last large city in the East that had not been conquered by the Turks. And so in 1440s sometime, it was given to a Latin bishop, a Roman bishop, Tommaso Parentucelli, who was later elected pope and who donated his library when he died. His library then became the possession of the Vatican. And there is no record of there being a library in the papal palace before that. The first catalog we have is from the 1470s, and it includes a description of this manuscript. They were very reluctant to let anybody have access to it until 1890. The first photographic copies were published. And then in 1999, there was a full color facsimile published, which you can buy. I think it's about $3,000 right now, because they didn't print that many of them. But it's been used along with Sinaiticus to compare our later translations, our later versions, because they're the Greek texts It's very, very valuable for us to ensure that we have an accurate version. So why are there few manuscripts from before 300 AD? We don't have any complete Bibles from before 300 AD. We have fragments. We have one or two complete books from the 200s. From the 100s, we have pages, and we have a few single sheets, really very degraded scraps that we are pretty sure go back before 100 AD. Pieces of papyrus that you can read. The words that we can read match up. If you look at a later full copy of one of the Gospels, you can say, oh, these are 3 words from that verse, and then 2 words from the next verse, and then 5. So this is a fragment of the Gospel of John. One of the fragments is in the Ryland Museum in Oxford. It may actually date to before 70 AD. It might date to before 50 AD. It's really tricky because there's no marker on there anywhere that says, oh yeah, this was written in a particular date. So the question is, why? Why don't we have anything before 350? Why do we have only sort of scattered pieces, fragments from the 100s and 200s? And the reason is really for a couple of physical properties of the early Bibles. The early Bibles, and the oldest pieces that we have, are done on papyrus. This is Egyptian papyrus. This is about $1 a page, even now. You take strips of the papyrus plant. It's a reed that grows along the banks of the river, and you pound them and beat them flat, and you press them to press all the water out, and then what you've got is a writable surface. The problem with this is it lasts a long time in a desert climate. But if you take it someplace where it rains, by the way, the average annual rainfall in Egypt is 1 inch for the year. That's why the Nile is so important. Everybody in Egypt lives within about 2 miles of the Nile River. All of the agriculture in Egypt is on either side of the Nile. Because you go more than 2 miles and there's literally a place where you walk and you'll have green grass and a wheat field here, and you'll take a step and it's sand. So you can find, we actually can go back into the period of the pharaohs and we can find some sheets of this, because in a dry climate it lasts. If you take this into a place where it rains, in about 10 years this will have degraded, and in about 25 it'll crumble. It just doesn't last. It's a plant-based. So the things that last are vellum. Vellum is just a fancy Latin word for an animal skin, either goats or calves. These are sheets of vellum. You can buy these on Amazon. Even now, this is about $1 a page. It comes from Egypt. These are about $15 a page. So I got a stack of those. I only got 2 pages of this because it's $15 a page. Paper doesn't come along until 1200. This is rag paper as opposed to wood-based paper. Wood-based paper doesn't come along until after 1800. So this is rag, but rag paper is about 50 cents a page. That's one reason why we don't have the older books, because vellum is very expensive. Papyrus doesn't last. A large book would be very expensive. If you have a 1,000-page book, which a Bible is going to be 1,000 pages, even written by hand in a small script, you're going to need 500 pieces of vellum at $15 a page. Even in current dollars, that's $7,500 before you start writing. And we know from some other later books, this is the Lindisfarne Gospels, just doing the 4 Gospels, we have an account about the bishop who made this copy, 5 years to write out the 4 Gospels. So if you got to pay for the materials and you got to pay for the labor of a scribe, a book is a luxury item, the equivalent of a sports car. If you own 5 cars, you're obviously very, very wealthy. If you owned 5 books, anytime from the ancient world down to 1500, you were Jay Leno. You know, you had a collection of cars if you had 5 books. The Pope that I mentioned actually was rather noted because everybody talked about him. He had collected and paid for over 100 books in his personal library, all copied by hand. So, and the final reason, this one surprised me. This one I only found out recently because I've been researching for my lecture on Constantine. The last persecution of the church that was empire-wide, it was the last and it was the worst. There was a decree by the Emperor Diocletian, not just that Christians should be suppressed, not just that Christians who wouldn't offer sacrifice to the Roman gods could be executed, but the decree was that the churches were to be destroyed and the scriptures of the Christians were to be confiscated and burned. And in fact, there were many, many more martyrs who were martyrs because they refused to give up the scriptures. You imagine if you have something on vellum, you know, you have separate, but if you have a gospel in vellum and the Roman soldiers come around with orders of the emperor, they're going to the churches and they're saying, hey, we've got an imperial decree. We're going to tear your church down and you have to hand over your scriptures. We're going to destroy them. It's a huge controversy because this is the emperor who precedes Constantine. But the scriptures were destroyed. Every copy that the Roman emperors, the Roman governors, the local Roman prefect is just a word for like city manager. Every copy of the scriptures they could get their hands on, they burned. And so that's probably the single most important reason why we don't have anything from before 300. Almost everything that existed was destroyed. And why Constantine would take such an interest in commissioning new copies to be made, and why the bishops and the monks who had preserved copies of the scriptures was so important. All right, let's move on to a little bit later, about 700 AD. This is, to me, one of the more fascinating versions of the scriptures. This is just the Gospels, and it was done in northern England. The Irish monks had evangelized the kingdom of Northumbria, and the king of Northumbria had given them an island where they had established a monastery. And the bishop of the Irish settlement on the island is the one who personally wrote this. And they managed to save it when the island was raided by the Vikings. And it's been preserved. As I say, this one is also in the British Museum, another good reason to go to London. And this is a photographic reproduction. I had this on my Amazon Christmas wish list a couple of years ago, and one of my children made me very, very happy, because that's every page of the Lindisfarne Gospel. And when you look at it, you see the photographs of these pages, and you realize not only did the bishop did the artwork, not only does he write every line of the Gospels out by hand, but he illustrated. There's a page like this at the beginning of each of the 4 Gospels. He does a picture of the evangelist. And he uses 4 or 5 different colors of ink that are all sourced locally for him. There's some geometric designations. You begin to understand the Bible was so expensive. It was so precious. There were so few copies. Not because anybody was suppressing it. It was just expensive and time-consuming. So there might be a Bible in a monastery. There may be a Bible in a larger church, but in a smaller church, maybe only the Gospel. This is only the 4 Gospels. The other fun thing is about 100 years after the Bishop of Lindisfarne did this copy, another scribe went through and wrote a gloss. You can see it in the brown ink above the black. The black ink was iron gall. The brown ink are Anglo-Saxon words that helped a reader understand the meaning of the Latin. So from about 800 AD, somebody has gone through, we don't know the name, somebody has gone through and put an Anglo-Saxon word in small letters above each Latin word to help people who maybe are not really great with Latin understand the scriptures. It's not a translation. It's not a fluent, here's what the sentence would be in Anglo-Saxon. It's just, this word in Latin is this word in Anglo-Saxon. So, and it's about the time of Beowulf. So a lot of our knowledge of Anglo-Saxon and a lot of our understanding of the text of Beowulf and the Song of the Rood and some of those early poets comes from the fact that we've got these words corresponding to Latin words that we know. It helps us to understand that dialect of language. Okay, moving on. Here we go, the Lindisfarne Gospels. There's that page. Bishop Eadfrith, 5 to 10 years, it's 518 pages, 259 sheets of vellum, iron gall ink with colored pigments, red lead, indigo, orpiment, verdigris, white lead, and chalk. And that's a picture of the island that's looking back at the mainland from the ruin of the monastic community. It's called the Holy Island. Has a population of about 150, has 2 hotels. Cindy and I last year got to go and stay. We stayed in the hotel that has 4 rooms. Delightful place to visit. And then the Anglo-Saxon. The text is in Latin. It's Jerome's Vulgate, which he had created, translated from Greek to Latin about 405 AD. And then that Anglo-Saxon note, which is so much fun. Very similar, now in Trinity College Library in Dublin, is the Book of Kells. Same monastic order as the monks on Lindisfarne, but this is probably done on the island of Iona. And then that island gets raided by the Vikings as well. They escape. They took this book with them. It wound up in Kells in Ireland, and from Kells eventually to Dublin. Here's a description of it from Gerald of Wales in 1185, who saw it. And he said, among the miracles of Kildare, nothing seems to me more miraculous than that wonderful book. This book contains the concordance of the 4 Gospels, according to St. Jerome, that's the Vulgate Latin text, with almost as many drawings as pages, and all of them in marvelous colors. If you look at them carelessly and casually and not too closely, you may judge them to be mere daubs rather than careful compositions. If you penetrate with your eyes to the secrets of the artistry, you will notice such intricacies that you will not hesitate to declare that all these things must have been the results of the work not of men, but of angels. And I don't have a facsimile of that. That's still on my Amazon wish list. But I've got a book about it which reproduces some of the pages and the artwork. And this is in Dublin, if you want to go see this. So the Irish monks did a lot, yeah. The first mentions identify it with the monastic community of Kells, Ireland, but it may have been written in Iona. Iona was attacked in 795, 802, 806. 807, they left. They relocated to the mainland, to Kells. The pages are 13 inches high, 10 inches wide. It's 340 pieces of vellum, 680 pages, and it's the Latin text. Yeah, I mean, this is, the Protestant Reformation is 1517. So this is all, they would have just thought of themselves as Christians. So all of these manuscripts that we have up until 1200, the books of the Bible are titled, and there are clear breaks from one book to the next, but there are no chapter divisions. Not in the Lindisfarne Gospels, not in the Book of Kells, no chapter divisions. No numbering of chapters, certainly no verse divisions. Chapter divisions and some numbering, or chapter numbering, first appear in the early 1200s. And the interesting thing about that is it's about the same time that rag paper became available. And rag paper is 50 cents a page versus vellum at $15 a page. So it's an order of magnitude less expensive. And even getting a copy handwritten by a scribe on rag paper becomes affordable. Instead of, I mean, it's like you can buy a cheap import compact car now instead of, an expensive German car. For $100,000, now you could buy something for maybe 10, maybe even 5. If you could forego, the hand lettering and illustrations, maybe even $4,000 or $5,000, you get your own personal Bible. 1200 is also the rise of the universities and the fact there are many more students now studying theology and studying the scriptures. All of those things contribute. A professor of Bible at the University of Paris named Stephen Langton taught there for 25 years and then became Archbishop of Canterbury. But he divided up the books of the Bible into chapters and gave each chapter a number. And all the scribes from about 1200 on copy his chapter numbers. They do the breaks where he did the breaks. So that's how old those, after 1300, almost all copies of the Bible incorporated the chapter visions for each book standardized by Stephen Langton. And I've got a picture here of a Paris Bible. This is handwritten, but you can see in red, you can't see them very well in the gutter there, but there's a set of Roman numerals and an illustrated capital letter that marks a new chapter. So the chapter number is always on the last line of the previous chapter. And there's another one down here. So here's the chapter number, and there's the first letter of the next chapter. And that's from a hand-copied Bible from about 1250. Rag paper. About 1150. Spain and Italy, we're not really sure who to credit for it, but by 1250, it's widespread. And you literally take worn-out clothes, you put them into a caustic solution, and you beat them and break them up and frag them, and then you take the slurry and you lay it out on a form and lift it up and let the water drain through, and then you press it, and you create sheets that look like this. This is made from rag paper. And this is the way all books were done until about 1800. It wasn't until after 1800 that we figured out how to do roughly the same process, but from dead trees instead of from cotton and wool. This is cotton and wool.
So they didn't mix any pulp in it to stick it together? What held the fibers together?
The natural collagen from the animal source, or the plant source in the case of cotton. So either cotton or wool rags, if you break them up, there's enough natural fiber in there that when you press them and dry them, it sticks together. So that came before printing, but it resulted in a change. It made the Bible more affordable and more accessible. And when Gutenberg goes to print, Gutenberg prints about 180 copies of the Bible with his first printing press. He prints about 15 or 20 of those on vellum. But even then, he's going for scale and economy and as low a cost as possible. So his other copies are all done on rag paper. There's a Gutenberg Bible, 1455. It is a work of art. It's the first Bible printed with movable type and the first Bible that's really mass-produced. Now, it was not cheap, but it was an order of magnitude. And now instead of it being, $5,000, it would be like $300 to $500 for a Bible. And you're cutting it by a factor of 10. It's gorgeous. The sheets are 17 inches high. The printer could order paper done in custom sizes. So they're 17 inches high, 8 inches wide, 644 leaves, 1,288 pages. The print run was probably about 180 copies. There are only 21 complete copies left in the world. There's another 28 that are partial. They have some damage or some missing pages or something. Of those 49 Gutenberg Bibles, 37 are in Europe. The British Museum, of course, has one. A bunch of the libraries in Germany have them. There are 11 copies in the U.S. There are 3 copies in the Morgan Library in New York City, which I had never heard of before. I don't know that I've ever been there. The New York Public Library has one. The Library of Congress has one. Harvard, of course, has one. Yale has one, of course. Princeton has one. And then Indiana University has one. The Huntington Library in California has one. And the 11th copy in the U.S. is at UT Austin in Texas. Go Aggies. There we go. Yeah. That's 48 of the 49. The 49th Gutenberg is in Japan, because of course it is. Some wealthy Japanese collector bought it and donated it to a Japanese library. I think I'm not sure where it is. I don't know whether it's Kyoto or Tokyo, but yeah, there's one Gutenberg. And it's important to notice that this would have been printed, the sheets would have come out of the press, just printed in black ink. Everything you see here that's not black is then later done by hand. And you paid for, it's like going to the car dealership and, what accessories do you want? Do you want a little gold leaf? Well, okay, now you're getting the expensive coupe. Do you want some colored illustrations here? Do you want some red ink to mark the end of an introduction? This, by the way, is the Gospel of John. John 1, which in Latin begins, a principio erat verbum. Verbum erat apud Deus, except space and time and type and paper is expensive, so he doesn't spell out every word. So a principio erat verbum, but the U there just has a little bar over it because the reader is supposed to know enough Latin to know that that word ends with an M. And the same thing for the word Deus here, it just ends with a bar over the U because the reader is supposed to know enough Latin to know that DEU means Deus. Because he's saving ink and saving type and saving space and therefore saving pages. But it's still an incredible, incredible work. And Gutenberg is rightly famous for having figured out how to do that. No, there are, depending on whether the purchaser wanted to pay for the extras or not, you might get one with just black ink.
Because I noticed one of these over here had some colored.
Oh, no, these are all individually done, and usually the scribe is doing it for a particular church, a cathedral church, or for his monastery. In this case, the Lindisfarne done by a bishop. So that's why you get it's a labor of love.
There's certain words he would color.
You do get some of that too. Yeah. Certain things that want to emphasize. By the way, the last single leaf from a Gutenberg, there are some Gutenberg Bibles outside of the 49. There are some that were broken up that are not even considered complete individual pages. Every now and then come up for auction at Sotheby's or Christie's or somewhere. The last one auctioned for $135,000 for one page. The last Gutenberg Bible to change hands was, I think, 20 years ago. Sold for $21 million for a single book. Yeah. I have the one sheet that, for me at least, has the most significance. In the world of printed books, there's a category of books called incunabula, which is the Latin word for infancy. So an incunabula is any book printed before the year 1500. So Gutenberg starts in 1455. Anything printed between 1455 and 1499 is an incunabula. And some of the libraries, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Berkeley, have incunabula collections, and they're kept under lock and key, and you have to put the gloves on to go into the room with them. I remember going into the Stanford Incunabula collection because I wanted to read some pamphlets that had been printed in the late 1400s. And yeah, I had to put the gloves on. This page was printed in 1479 in Venice. And the printer, his name is Nicholas Jensen. he had apprenticed to Gutenberg for 4 years, 1458 to 1462. So Gutenberg prints his first book in 1455. Jensen works for Gutenberg from 58 to 62, and then he goes to Venice in 69 and sets up his own printing press because he learned from Gutenberg how to do it. And this Bible was printed on his press in Venice in 1479, so it's an incunabula. And you can see. It is. Well, it's, no, it's Jeremias. It's the book of Jeremiah. That's the Latin word Jeremias. And it's a little plainer. He didn't have the same rich patrons that Gutenberg did. It's a little plainer, so he's printing the black text. The only color are these initial letters at the beginning of each chapter. And you can see in black ink just above, here's the Roman numeral, XLII, meaning not that this is chapter 12 above, but that this chapter has ended, and starting on the next line is going to be chapter 12. And the first letter of chapter 12 is then done as an artistic decoration by hand with a little bit of color. So that page is 530 some years old from Venice. But no verse numbers. Chapter numbers, but no verse numbers. The next really significant Bible is Luther's Bible. Luther had done a translation of the New Testament in 1521 after he was condemned as a heretic by the emperor, and on his way home he got kidnapped by a band of ruffians and disappeared. And nobody knew where he was. Well, some people knew where he was, but the public didn't know where he was. We actually have an entry from Albrecht Dürer in his diary in Nuremberg where he's just in despair because he's gotten the news that Luther was kidnapped, and he just assumes they've taken him off somewhere and killed him. Luther was being hidden at one of the Elector of Saxony's castles, and the first thing he did was ask them to send his copy of the Greek New Testament that Erasmus had printed and his Greek dictionary and Greek grammar. And he translated every book of the New Testament from Greek into German in about 4 months. And came back, and the next year they printed the New Testament in German. First time any book of the Bible had been printed in anything other than Greek or Latin. It then takes him 12 years, with a lot of help. He had a group that he called his rabbinate, his Sanhedrin, who all knew Hebrew. They're all working hard on figuring out Hebrew and getting Hebrew dictionaries and Hebrew grammars. And he finally has all of the books of the Old Testament translated from Hebrew into German in 1534. And that is this Bible here. And again, this is a facsimile, and it's a little bit smaller, and it's in 2 volumes, but they've reproduced the artwork. There's the title page. It's Biblia, das ist die ganze Heilige Schrift Deutsch. Martin Luther Wittenberg, by the grace of the Elector of Saxony. And it gives you the date, MD 1534. And so this is, and yeah, that's the Bible where this copy was photographed. And you can see the artwork, same thing. They would have printed black ink, and then they had artists who went through and were commissioned to do the color illustrations. And it's every book of the Bible. There's a table of contents there. So I've been trying to get my hands on a page from that edition, from the 1534, and they're a little hard to find. I've not been able to get one, but they reprint in 1535, 1536, 1539, and then they do a major revision and print again in 1541, and I got that one. So that's in German. And it's printed in Wittenberg by the same printer who did the 1534 edition, Hans Luft. I've actually got a book that just came out 2 years ago, 16 essays by German historians just about Wittenberg Bible printing. And they give the biography. Hans Luft, who is Luther's printer, went on to be burgomaster. He's mayor of Wittenberg for a while, along with Lucas Cranach, the artist. He's also burgomaster for a while. So, but yeah, that, and one of the amazing things, Carrie was looking at these earlier, several people were looking at the clarity of the type on that. When you consider this is on a printing press, it's not machine driven. It's got a screw that's adapted from a wine press or an olive oil press, and they turn the screw to push the inked plate down on the rag paper.
On hand-carved wooden blocks.
No, not wooden blocks, metal type.
Oh, they're metal.
Metal type. Each letter is a separate piece of metal. And they're putting them together line by typesetting. They're putting the lines together line by line, locking them in, putting them in. And they would print 4/4. So they'd print 8 pages, print 4 pages on one side, 4 pages on the next side, and then fold them and cut them. But so you typeset 4 pages, print. These runs are typically about 2,000 to 3,000. Print 2,000 to 3,000 pages, and then break up all the type, resort it. By the way, metal type, this has got both uppercase and lowercase. You know why we call capital letters uppercase and the smaller letters lowercase? Because when you sort the type at the desk where you're setting it, the lowercase letters go in the case that's down below, and the uppercase letters go in the case that's up above. So big letters go in the uppercase, small letters go in the lowercase. There's a little cubby hole for each letter of the alphabet.
Rob, was the Bible canonized sometime back here before the 1500s?
Oh, you need to go look at the earlier lecture. How did we figure out which books are in the Bible? Yeah, go to the YouTube channel. I got a whole hour-long lecture on that. It was all recognized. The Council of Nicaea recognizes which books the church has recognized as authoritative, and that's by 300 AD. We have several lists from the 200s of that various bishops writing to each other that list which books are authoritative, which books has the church recognized as inspired. So that's been thousands of years before this.
So 300 after the big tribulation.
Before the big tribulation. The Council of Nicaea doesn't go through and, vote on each, well, what about this book? Is this one in? What do people think? Yay or nay? No. The council just recognizes what had already been decided over the previous 150 years. So yeah, everybody, all the churches everywhere recognize these 66 books are the ones that are inspired. We all agree these are the ones that are authoritative. That's recognized by the Council of Nicaea, but they didn't actually make any decision. They just said, yeah, we want to let everybody know, by the way. The big issue at the Council of Nicaea was adopting a creed and deciding how to calculate the date of Easter. So you can blame them. It's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, which means it moves in the calendar over 6 weeks. Anyway, okay. 1541 text was completely reviewed and revised by Luther. New illustrations. Yeah. Okay. Now we get to one of my favorite books here, and I want to get through this and finish this up. The Stephanus, 1551. Stephanus is a French printer. He's printed several copies of the Greek text of the New Testament in Paris, but he's become convinced that Luther is right, and he's become identified as a Protestant. And so the French king has ordered all the Protestants to either rejoin the church or leave, and he leaves. He flees to Geneva. But he takes a lot of his printing equipment with him, and he quickly sets up a press there, and he prints. The first book he prints in Geneva, because he's a French refugee, so, paper is expensive, so this is a small, and this is really a specialized kind of Bible. This has the Greek text in the center. It has the Latin of Jerome in the left-hand column, and it has the Latin of Erasmus in the right-hand column. And he's setting this thing up, and he goes, okay, how are scholars using this thing going to make sure they're looking at the same text? They're looking at a Latin text by Jerome, a Latin text by Erasmus, and the Greek text, I know, I'll put numbers in. And so Stephanus, you can see them here. He puts a number by each verse. There's a story told by his son, I think, that he actually did the numbering of the manuscript as he was traveling from Paris to Geneva. And several later scholars have said, yeah, he was definitely on horseback because some of these don't make any sense. But everybody adopted them. Some of them don't make sense. Some of them are really crazy. But once this came out, every other printer in Europe and every printer since has used this set of numbers. The chapter numbers were already there. Now we have the verse numbers. And like I said, I got this one cheap at an auction because nobody knew what it was. And I was going, you got a Stephanus? Yeah. I'll take that page, thank you very much. And the last one I want to talk about, and then I really will open it up and let you come up and take a look. This is a Geneva Bible. This was the standard Bible in the English-speaking world for almost 80 years, preceded the King James. Originally done, John Knox worked on this. They picked up the most of the translation that had been done by Tyndale. It's word for word identical to Tyndale's New Testament. The King James, by the way, is 90% word for word with Tyndale's. This was printed first in Geneva because we had a Catholic queen in England who was persecuting Protestants, the Protestant martyrs of Fox's Book of Martyrs from the reign of Mary. So there was a large refugee community of English Protestants in Geneva. And they did this translation, they typeset it, and then it became the book for English Protestants until 1644. King James did not supplant this for about 30 years. This continued after the King James was first translated. And it's very interesting for a couple of reasons. You can see, very nice, clear chapter numbers, very nice, clear verse numbers, 2 columns. The typography is gorgeous. But then you notice there's these little, even smaller type. We would have a hard time on a printer now getting that, it would start to pixelate. That's commentary added. And I particularly added, this is a page that I wanted. I was able to request the page from the book of Daniel because Daniel 3:18 is my new motto theme verse. Be it known to thee, O king, we will not serve thy gods. So I got that from the King James, or not King James, from the Geneva. Now, here's the other little secret about the King James. I'm going to step on toes here, I know. But the reason King James wanted a new Bible, the reason he commissioned 40-something scholars and 6 committees to do a new translation, his instruction to them, by the way, was use the ecclesiology of the Church of England. So in 1 Timothy, where it talks about elders, that word is bishop. The Greek is episkopos. He says, don't translate bishop, episkopos, as elder, translate it as bishop, because that's what we have in the Church of England. Revise the Bishop's Bible, and here's this is the big reason. This is really the reason that compelled the translation. He says, whatever you do, omit those marginal notes. All that stuff about kings and pharaohs and rulers who are tyrants and who should be disobeyed. He says, I don't want any of that. So the text is not all that different. The King James text is not very different than the Geneva Bible. It's very, very close, but it doesn't have any of the marginal comments. But this was printed in London. This is 1597. Same text from 1560. Just no changes at all because it was so popular. And this is the Bible of the Puritans. When the Puritans came over, the Pilgrims came over in 1620 and the Puritans in 1640, this was their Bible. They didn't like the King James Bible. They liked this Bible. They liked those marginal notes. They helped. And they provided a lot of support for what you do when the king is a tyrant. Which King James says, I'd take that stuff out. So, sorry. I may have stepped on a toe or two there, but which brings us my final little closing note. This is a marvel. This is amazing. This is a New King James. This is the full text of the Bible, and you can pick these up for $10, $12, $20, maybe $30, depending on what you get. Nice, clear typography, chapter numbers, verse numbers. It's amazing how this has developed and what riches we have, and how convenient it is now for us to have a personal Bible when originally Bibles were tremendously expensive and rare. And if you wanted to consult one, you had to go to the church. And for a long time, you had to know Latin. Not because they were suppressing the Bibles in any other language, just it was expensive. We can only afford one. And it's going to be the Latin one because that's the one everybody's been using for centuries. That's the one all of our other authors use, so we need the Latin text to be able to look anything up. So there might be a Bible in your town, in your village. There might be a Bible in the church. And now we have this. This is a New King James. Yeah. Because it takes out the these and thous. It's a little more readable. I use this when I teach my high school kids. Although my men's Bible study, we use the ESV. So I'm not hung up on. We do a lot of looking things up in the Greek. All right. That's all I got. I'm out of time. I thought I would leave more time, but, what can I say? I hope that was of some interest and assistance and helped you get a bigger picture of all of this stuff. I'll hang around for a while. I won't pack these things up. Come up, taste, touch, and handle.
It was about 2 years ago that you did How We Got the Bible. It's still on our YouTube channel.
It's still on the ALC YouTube channel. It's also on the Francis Schaeffer Study Center channel.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so I did a 55-minute sermon, on how we got the Old Testament, and another 55-minute sermon, how we got the New Testament. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How much would the King James cost?
Sorry?
How much would the King James Bible have cost?
It's hard to translate numbers, but when they were being mass produced at that point, even the Geneva Bible would have been anywhere from $20 or $30 to $100. So getting it down to $10 is, modern technology. It would not have been a trivial purchase, especially when you consider what most people's income levels were. So, good question. All right, thank you again, and I'll leave all of this out. Feel free to come up, and feel free to pick this stuff up and look at it as close as you want.